What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Patrick, aka Addicted to Combat, back for another week of fights, and this time it is the big pay-per-view card. Adesanya defending against Cannonier, Volkanovski in a trilogy bout against Holloway. I'm so excited as a fan, but also as a bettor. I think there are some great spots to make some money this week, both on the money lines and the props that will be released soon. So without further ado, let's get into this 12-fight card. Also, shout out to my boy Eric Betts Fights for this Fight Nerds and Dirty Gamblers tank that I picked up on his shop. So go give Eric Betts Fights a subscribe on YouTube, a follow on Twitter. He's a great guy, great content, and these tanks are very comfy to do my tape study in and drop these breakdowns. So without further ado, let's get into this fight card. Okay, kicking off the night is Jessica Rose Clark taking on Julia Stoliarenko, women's bantamweight 135-pound bout. Jessica Rose Clark is 34 years old, 5'4", 66-inch reach. Stoliarenko, the Lithuanian submission fighter, she is 29 years old, so 5 years younger than Rose Clark, 5'8", and the same reach, 66-inch reach. So right off the bat, the betting lines for this are a little bit strange, right? Jessica Rose Clark is only a -140 favorite currently over Stoliarenko, the +120 underdog. I think these lines will definitely go more in the favor of Rose Clark as this this week progresses. This is still very early in the week. I think Stoliarenko actually opened up as maybe a slight favorite here, and it's odd because she's 0-4 in the UFC overall. She had a brief stint early on, I think a featherweight bout against Leah Letson, and then after that she's been on her current streak, which is 0-3. Not even against great fighters either. You know, you're talking about Alexis Davis, who's pretty old at this point, Julia Avila, and Yana Kunitsukaya. So Julia Avila, probably the best out of those three, but she got choked out in that fight. So not a very impressive run so far. Like I mentioned, she's a Lithuanian submission fighter, very good arm bars. She has 9 wins and 6 losses, does Stoliarenko, and 8 of those 9 wins are submission, all 8 of them coming by arm bar, usually very early in the fight too. So the issue is that Stoliarenko has this great submission game, but not really a good ability to take the fight to the ground. Out of her total 12 UFC rounds, she's only managed to successfully get 1 takedown against Julia Avila, and that was there's a couple of reversals in there too. She has threatened a lot of submissions, and by the time she even falls to her back, whether she's pulling guard or getting taken down herself, she's already throwing up the legs, already looking for wrist control and trying to lock in that armbar. And she's almost gotten it a couple times, especially against Alexis Davis. Very close to securing that submission. Jessica Rose Clark now, the reason why this is such a close fight on the money line, like I said, -140 favorite for Rose Clark, and a girl who's 0-4, and Stoliarenko is only +120. It's just because of the perceived notion that there's a weakness in Rose Clark's game. She just got armbarred in round 1 by Stephanie Egger, but that was really a different situation where Stephanie Egger is very strong in the clinch, and she's a strong judoka, and she has the ability to, do the hip toss, get the fight to the ground, and she was able to get a textbook, leg over the face armbar, so I just think that, the ability to use that headlock and the judo throws, that's something that we're not seeing from Julia Stoliarenko. As I mentioned, all of these rounds in the UFC, only 1 takedown. Jessica Rose Clark is very strong in the clinch, vicious elbows. At distance, she's got a good 1-2, good 1-1-2s at distance. She's very light on her feet, but she knows when to, plant her feet and exchange combinations in the pocket. I like Rose Clark's stand-up a lot in this fight. It's going to look night and day against Stoliarenko, who has such a negative striking differential. It's really bewildering. It's like, I think she gets outstruck like double. Every 1 strike that she lands so far in the UFC, she gets hit by 2 on average. So not very good. At least Rose Clark is a positive striking differential. She lands more than she gets hit back in return. And she eats damage very well, does Rose Clark. And I don't see that from Stoliarenko, who, if she gets hit clean, she does kind of submit to that and start being backpedaled for the rest of the stand-up exchange. Don't get me wrong, like Jessica Rose Clark is not a high-level kickboxer, but she's good enough in this fight, in my opinion. Obviously, like Pannie Kianzad and like fighters like that who are more accurate and can really split the guard of Rose Clark can outstrike her on the feet, but as long as Rose Clark doesn't make a mistake maybe knock down Stoliarenko or allow herself to get armbarred from that position on top. And I think after losing in round 1 by Stephanie Egger, she had to be drilling armbar defense and submission defense and knowing, kind of building a strategy of how to keep this in the feet or at least stay safe well on top. So really the best hope in this fight is to have like a Chris Curtis, Rodolfo Vieira type scenario like last week where, any attempt at ground fighting from Rodolfo Vieira, Chris Curtis just kind of danced away from it and kept it at striking range. I don't think we'll be that lucky with the fight IQ of Rose Clark, but I think she will stay safe in this. And for only having to pay minus 140 on Rose Clark against a fighter in Stoliarenko who's 0-4 in the UFC and has pretty abysmal stand-up, I wouldn't mind making that bet right now. If this gets any crazier, past minus 160 or so, probably not a good bet. Maybe you would just look for Rose Clark by decision at that point. Or if you're really just a Rose Clark hater, you don't really have much faith in her fight IQ, which I agree with, then you would probably look for Stoliarenko by early submission, maybe a round 1 submission prop if that's juicy enough. But I think the later this fight goes, the less of a chance she gets that submission. Rose Clark's cardio is pretty decent. So give me Rose Clark to win this fight, most likely by a decision. Okay, up next is a really fun fight at middleweight between Brad Tavares taking on the newcomer Dricus du Plessis. And I say newcomer because he's only had 2 fights in the UFC so far. He's a guy coming over from KSW, actually known as a submission fighter more than a striker. But now in the UFC so far, Dricus du Plessis has had 2 very spectacular knockouts. One over Perez, where he got a short left-hand hook against the cage, knocked him out. And one over Trevin Giles most recently. It was a nice pull counter cross that knocked out Trevin Giles. So, very good array of skills for Dricus du Plessis, who is 28 years old, only 6'1", 76-inch reach. Brad Tavares, been in the UFC for like 12 years now. The ultimate gatekeeper, he is 34 years old, somewhere around 6 foot tall and 74-inch reach. So I think slightly shorter by an inch or so when they measure up, a couple inches less of reach, and a little bit older. He's still not past his prime in the middleweight division, coming off of a couple decision wins here. 19-6 is Brad Tavares, 16-2 is Dricus du Plessis. And the odds are very fair here. I mean, Brad Tavares and Dricus du Plessis were like pick-em price tag, minus 110, minus 110. I think money coming in on du Plessis on a lot of books now, he'll be like minus 120, minus 130. So getting that money on Dricus du Plessis early, or waiting for the props, which is a good way to play this as well, because Dricus du Plessis, 16 wins, all 16 coming inside the distance, as I mentioned, a mix of submissions and now lately knockouts as well. The only time that he's been defeated, it was an early submission loss early in his career, and the other loss that he had, his other second loss for Dricus du Plessis, was a rematch against the KSW champion currently, who is Roberto Soldic. And if you don't know who that guy is, you should take a look. He's very impressive, and I believe they're going to try to get him to the UFC. He's gunning for that. I think it's the right time for him too. Another young guy who's at the height of his career. So a UFC caliber opponent he's lost to. He did get knocked out cold in that fight in like round 3, but if anything he showed in that fight, he did show some toughness, some resolve, and he showed the ability that he is more of a high volume striker than he is given credit for so far in the UFC. You're not getting a chance to see how his strikes would measure up over a 3-round fight, because he never quite makes it to the judge's decision. Whereas Brad Tavares, that would be the way he wins this fight, in my opinion. Brad Tavares has got great leg kicks, very serviceable striking, a nice crisp jab. And the way Brad Tavares has been successful over all of these years in the UFC is he's able to nullify the takedowns very well. He's got one of the highest, routinely over 10 years, has one of the highest takedown defense ratings ever. He's very good. Even in his most recent fights against guys like not just Omari Akhmedov, but against Antonio Carlos Jr., who's got very good takedowns and very powerful takedowns, a strong guy. You see Brad Tavares nullifying the majority of them very impressively. So that might be an issue against Dricus du Plessis, but du Plessis is able to strike very quickly. He'll be the faster man, and he's a very effective, powerful striker too. So Brad Tavares usually wins by nullifying a huge part of people's the necessary part of their game, which is getting the takedowns, these BJJ guys, these wrestle boxer type guys. And then once they are unable to do so, he's already outstruck them over the minutes of 3 rounds. So I think that's a little bit off the table against Dricus du Plessis, but if Duplessis tries to like measure up a impressive knockout, or he's just waiting too long on the outside, trying to land the perfect shot and not just putting up points on the board, maybe he could lose 2 out of 3 or all 3 rounds of this fight. But I think against the cage, Dricus du Plessis is very strong, very crafty. He knows he can pull guard for guillotines, which he's very good at, knowing that if he is on bottom, he can very easily transition to a top position. He's very good in the grappling scrambles, as is Brad Tavares too, and that's why this is a very close fight. But I'm just seeing more ways to win for du Plessis. Brad Tavares has never been submitted, but I don't think that's off the table. He has been knocked out 3 times by Shabazian, Tim Boach, and by Robert Whitaker, all coming, pretty early on in the fight before the halfway mark. So, I think this could be either a decision win for du Plessis, but more likely it'll be another inside the distance finish. The money line itself is good enough to take a stab on Dricus du Plessis, in my opinion. But when the props drop, obviously a sprinkle on inside the distance would be statistically the way to go, right? Especially if you get plus money on it. But if it's too much of a difference, if it's not enough of a difference in value between the inside the distance prop and the money line of like minus 120, minus 130, I would just take the money line. But otherwise, some of the props like Tavares by decision wouldn't be bad. I mean, Tavares is like 12-3 in decisions, got a wealth of experience, and I'm not counting him out at all. But I just think that the wide array of skills and the more past the victory and the momentum are going towards Dricus du Plessis. So I think he gets this done, most likely by another KO. But, if that submission prop is juicy because Tavares has never been submitted, I don't think it's off the table. So give me Dricus du Plessis inside the distance. I'm pretty confident. Up next at women's flyweight is Jessica Evil Eye taking on Macy Barber. This is young versus old. The 35-year-old Jessica Eye with a 5'6" frame, 66-inch reach. So she is an inch taller, an inch longer, and she's 11 years older than the 24-year-old Macy Barber. Macy Barber currently has 7 fights in the UFC. Even though she is so young, I usually forget that. She has had so many fights so far, very successful. I think she is like 5-2 in those fights. Her only 2 losses are decision losses against Roxanne Modafferi and Alexa Grasso. So 26 fights, so more than double the amount of fights for Jessica Eye, 15 in the UFC. She's fought everybody. She's a former bantamweight, Macy Barber a former strawweight, although she was quite young at that time. Jessica Eye is 12-8 in decisions, usually in very close fights, very, very durable. She's only been knocked out 1 time, and that was by Valentina Shevchenko herself, that iconic head kick. So, Jessica Eye used to train out of Strong Style MMA, which was a very good strength and conditioning gym in Ohio, kind of where Stipe Miocic trained as well. She's since left a couple years ago and now gone to Extreme Couture, so probably a bigger space with some better training partners. Things that I liked about Jessica Eye, not only is she durable, not only is she experienced in this fight, but she does have very good fundamental kickboxing, good combinations in the pocket, a very good jab that keeps her opponents at bay. And she is, even though she doesn't gain the most respect off of the power of these strikes, she does have very good technique, and she can really expose wild strikers, which is what Macy Barber has been in the past. Now, I wish that I would have gotten a chance to see more of Macy Barber's striking in her last fight against Montana De La Rosa. It was mostly a grappling affair. Now being a team alpha male, you can expect that she's got improved, takedown offense and defense, submission defense, and we saw a lot of that against Montana De La Rosa, but not a lot of striking, So I was really hoping to see more of that when she returned after getting that very, very close decision win over Miranda Maverick, one that I personally thought she clearly lost, but it was a win nonetheless. So now, we're going to see as she gets older. She's 24 now. When she gets to 25, 26, I think she really needs to just shore up the holes in her striking game. If she gets extended out in these striking exchanges, as the fight goes on, she does tend to gas out and start overextending herself and leaving a lot of openings where she gets hit. I think Jessica Eye could definitely do that. If this were to stay on the feet for 15 rounds, I would probably favor Jessica Eye in that situation. Macy Barber does have very good aggression, good power, and that can take you a long ways. But like I mentioned, she tends to gas out in these striking exchanges, never really too high output, and it's very, very sloppy as the fight goes on. Where Macy Barber will win this fight is pushing against the cage, being the more active fighter in the clinch. She does have powerful elbows, punches, and knees in the clinch. very good with that. She does have some good takedowns. And if she needs to relentlessly go for those takedowns in this fight as well. Jessica Ai is very good at advancing, being kind of the more aggressor as far as slow plotting, but stalking down her opponents with the striking. And Jessica Ai will have to be careful that she doesn't advance her way right into being taken down. Her takedown defense will have to be on point more now more than ever. But if this does stay standing, part of why I'm not too worried about the losing streak of Jessica Ai, the fight against Calderwood was actually very close. The stats would have you believe otherwise, but watching the fight, it wasn't that uncompetitive. And especially her last fight against Jennifer Maia, who's a perennial top 5, top 10 fighter, former challengers, Jennifer Maia. And they had a standing striking match for 3 rounds straight. Jessica Ai actually outlanded her by 2 significant strikes, triple digits on that, 100 significant strikes landed for Jessica Ai. You know, I thought that the more damaging strikes did eventually come from Jennifer Maia, where I thought she won 2 rounds to 1, but it was very contested bout. I mean, there's a lot of people that actually scored that for Jessica Ai, and Jessica Ai definitely had more of the variety of strikings, better combinations. It was the headhunting nature of Jennifer Maia that actually gave her the more damaging, I think, significant strikes and why she won the fight. But again, I still think that it was... if this stayed 15 minutes of striking, I think Jessica Ai has the veteran savvy and just the fundamental striking to win this match. And where the odds are is just a little bit out of whack for me. So I'm going to take Jessica Ai to win this match by decision. It's not a high confident pick, but I think if the prop drops for Jessica Ai by decision, and that's upwards of plus 300, plus 320 or something. If we could get that much when it drops, I would definitely maybe throw a sprinkle on that. As close as these women's fights have been lately, as close as the judging has been lately, this is certainly a pass betting-wise for me. I think Maycee Barber has the momentum and the ability to improve and shore up those striking holes in her game, but I've yet to see it yet. Just based on her age, you probably want to fade Jessica Ai in this spot because of her losing streak. You'd want to fade her, and that's why the odds are the way that they are. But if you really take a detailed look at the just the level of striking difference between these two, the level of experience between these two, and the durability of Jessica Ai, I think this should be a lot closer. So I'll take her as an underdog in this fight. Okay, up next at middleweight is an interesting bout between Uriah Hall and Andre Muniz. It's basically a gatekeeper versus newcomer type of situation here, and a perfect example of a striker versus grappler matchup to a T. Andre Muniz is the minus 250 favorite over the plus 200 underdog Uriah Hall. I think that line is a bit wide for as black and white as this fight is. I think it should be a lot closer. Not to mention that Uriah Hall, the much older guy here. Well, I shouldn't say much older. He's 5 years older, but he is in his late 30s, 37 years old. They're about the same height and same reach. 1 inch separates both of them. An inch of reach goes to Uriah Hall. An inch of height goes to Andre Muniz. Andre Muniz, amazing submission fighter. 15 submission wins over 22 fights. He is 22-4 in his professional career. Has had 4 UFC fights so far. 1 decision win over Antonio Arroyo. And then now riding a 3-fight win streak in the UFC, all first-round submission wins. We're talking about Bartosz Fabinski. We're talking about the first guy ever to submit Jacare Souza, who's a legend of the game, and the guy who just most recently submitted Eric Anders in the end of round 1, another armbar. So, he's a very fast starter, as Andre Muniz. We haven't seen much of the striking in the UFC. I saw a little bit on his regional scene footage. Nothing too great, but it's just all basically an attempt to get in close, get the body lock, get the fight to the ground, and start looking for the submission victory, which is very possible here against Uriah Hall. Uriah Hall, however, 17-10. Record, so not the best record, but he's spent, the large majority of his career in the UFC. For the past 9 years plus, he's been in the UFC. The first time I saw Uriah Hall, I remember he got a crazy knockout over a guy named Adam Cella on the Ultimate Fighter in the house. He put the guy literally to sleep. He was snoring on the canvas after Uriah Hall hit him with one of the most vicious spinning wheel kicks you'll ever see. And at that point, he was on a string of knockouts. I thought he would win the Ultimate Fighter Championship. He almost did, and then came to the UFC, and it's been a little bit lackluster, but he's been facing nothing but contenders and either future champions or title challengers. He's got that gatekeeper status because he fights anybody, and he literally will have that one ceiling where it's like he can beat everybody except for the top guys. So you can go through his record of all of his 18 fights. And most recently, he's really not been that impressive. Ever since 2018, he's kind of fallen off quite a bit. Let me just destroy his record real fast. He, got knocked out by Paulo Costa in round 2. That happens. Then he had kind of a lackluster performance against Bavon Lewis, who fanned out of the UFC, not a very good guy. It took him until round 3 to right the ship of that fight and to knock out Bavon Lewis. Antonio Carlos Jr., I'm going to talk about that fight quite a bit. He won a very close contested split decision over Antonio Carlos Jr. Another guy not in the UFC anymore, but he is tearing it up in the PFL, so I'll give him that. Then a couple years ago, he fought Anderson Silva in his retirement fight. Pushing 50-year-old Anderson Silva. It took him until round 4 to knock out Silva. I know he damaged him in round 3, but still. Took him until round 4. Didn't show much urgency at all in that fight early on. Chris Weidman. He beats Chris Weidman in 17 seconds without throwing a single strike. Chris Weidman just broke his own leg on a checked kick on Uriah Hall. And then most recently, he lost last year to Sean Strickland over 5 rounds of a dominant performance. He got doubled up on strikes, hurt several times by Sean Strickland, and taken down and controlled several times as well. So not the best, record recently for Uriah Hall, whose career has been up and down in the UFC regardless. I like the younger Andre Muniz. I like the urgency and the speed of Andre Muniz. Andre Muniz is a very, very fast starter. A lot of round 1 submissions. Uriah Hall probably has to knock him out, counter him with something, catch him rushing in. I'd say Uriah Hall either has to, start fast in this fight, which he normally doesn't do, or he'll have to just survive and be so defensively sound early that he can, catch a gassed, slowing down Andre Muniz in rounds 2 or rounds 3. But I just really think that he'll get taken down and controlled. I'll go back to the Antonio Carlos Jr. fight, which was back in 2019 for Uriah Hall. He got taken down several times in that fight. Usually off of the cage is where he's most susceptible to get body locked and taken down, tripped and taken down. He was backpacked by Antonio Carlos Jr. a couple times in that fight. Back mounted several times in that fight. Somehow survived all of the submission attempts. And just landed the better moments in the feet, even scoring a knockdown, I believe it was in round 2 against Antonio Carlos Jr., and he won a very close split decision. He easily could have lost that fight. He was controlled about 10 minutes, was Uriah Hall. And the people always talk about, I've seen in the breakdowns for these fights, that, Uriah Hall has never been submitted, so that's kind of a talking point for, how he can survive against Andre Muniz. Uriah Hall in the past, 10 years, has not really fought that many submission threats, honestly. A lot of these guys are strikers. A lot of these guys are, maybe wrestle boxers that can mix in the takedowns and get ground and pound. But Antonio Carlos Jr. was really the guy who was, the most like Andre Muniz, and he was able to control him for 10 minutes of the fight, mount several submission attempts against Uriah Hall. And I think given the same, opportunities, I think Andre Muniz finishes that fight. So I'm going to take Andre Muniz. I'm not crazy about the money line. I think it's way too wide. But, I would take round 1 Muniz submission. I would take, fight doesn't go to decision, which could probably cover both sides. But I think both of those props are going to be very juiced and obvious ones that the bookies will see. So I'll try to jump on those early when the props do drop. But, this might just be a pass for me overall. I think Andre Muniz wins. I think he should be the favorite, but he's way too wide of a favorite. So give me Andre Muniz. I'll say another round 1 submission victory. Okay, up next at 170 pounds is Donald Cerrone, finally, possibly making his return to the UFC against Jim Miller. I say that because Jim Miller was supposed to fight Bobby Green. That fight fell through. Now Donald Cerrone was supposed to fight Joe Lozon twice now in the past few months at 155. They're not going to make him cut weight again. This will be at 170, I believe. So, hopefully Donald Cerrone, he pulled out of the first fight with Joe Lozon. Joe Lozon had to pull out of the second fight, so now he's finally got a dance partner here, a guy he's beaten before in Jim Miller, another guy who's up there in age. Jim Miller is 38 years old, 5'8", 71-inch reach. Donald Cerrone, 39 years old, his elder, 6 foot tall, and 73-inch reach. So, a few inches of height, a couple inches of reach. Donald Cerrone will be the guy who's fought at welterweight, more frequently. I'm not sure if Jim Miller's. I know he's fought up at like catch weights above 155, but not really a welterweight fighter. But this will probably make it easier for two guys who are kind of at this point in their career. They don't have to make the weight cuts, so I don't think that'll affect things too much. Especially since Jim Miller has been the much more frequent fighter, the guy who's been preparing for big fights like Bobby Green. Donald Cerrone, the last time he won a fight was a long time ago, back in like 2017, 2018. He's on a 6-fight non-win streak. And I say that because, Nico Price was a draw. It would have been a loss if it wasn't for the point deducted. But, both guys are black belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Both guys have, a pretty good array of skills in mixed martial arts. And combined, they have like over 100 professional fights. I mean, this is a very high experience fight. It's just two guys that are past their prime. I just think Donald Cerrone is way more past his prime at this point. And it's funny because the Joe Lozon fight was kind of a fight where it was, even Stevens as far as one guy had been gone in Joe Lozon for 3 years. He's been washed up. Donald Cerrone has been fighting, but, not having great results. This fight is different where, now Donald Cerrone is the plus 180 underdog, Jim Miller the minus 220 favorite. And it's because Jim Miller's coming off of a kind of a resurgence in his career, a 2-fight win streak, both second-round knockouts. So, still though, anything that's over 1.5 rounds, Jim Miller will lose that fight. I think the last time he had a fight that went over 1.5 rounds and he won was against like Thiago Alves back in 2016. So that's always a red flag for me, is when there's a guy who has a complete pattern of falling apart the later the fight goes. When they tend to fight on an expiration date, they fight on like a timer. I don't like betting on guys like that. And for that reason, I think this line is too wide at minus 220 for Jim Miller. Up a weight class and, not really having the best results, late in fights. Not that I think Donald Cerrone would outpoint him down the stretch, but, based on the statistics, it's a possibility. So, usually great grappling defense historically for Donald Cerrone, great striking. In these two's first fight together back in 2014, I think it was, Donald Cerrone was able to counter-strike pretty well against Jim Miller, defend against the takedowns. He had a good get-up game. He was much younger and faster at that point. It's crazy what the difference of 8 years makes. And, so light on his feet, great knees and kicks to the body, which ended up, being the downfall of Jim Miller. He, Cerrone hit him into the body so many times, damaged Jim Miller to the body. I think knocked him down with a body shot at one point. And, then faked a kick low that ended up going high and knocking him out. So, I'd be surprised if that same result happens this time. I'd be surprised if Jim Miller can't ground Donald Cerrone or even outstrike him early in this fight. I'm going to call Jim Miller to win this pretty early. I think he can jab his way in range. He's got a nice jab, and then he'll kind of lunge forward with that overhand left. And that's usually a good strike for him. I think he can catch Donald Cerrone with that if he's pulling back in a straight line. If not, just knock him down, maybe get a club and sub. But I think he does get this done fairly early in this fight. And I just favor the more active Jim Miller in this fight. This is not a high confidence pick by any means. It's hard to really gain much from what Donald Cerrone has done recently. These are two really aged guys, and I wouldn't be putting much money on this fight, especially with Jim Miller being such a huge favorite, which I don't agree with. But I think he's the rightful favorite, and I think he gets the job done early. Okay, super fun fight up next at welterweight between gifted Gabe Green and Ian Garry. Ian Garry is the undefeated Irishman coming out of Cage Warriors, where he did his entire pro career before coming to the UFC. This will be his third UFC bout. He's 9-0 professionally, only 24 years old is Ian Garry, 6'3", which is massive for the division, and 74.5-inch reach. Gabe Green, 29 years old, so 5 years his elder, still a very young man, and 5'10", 73-inch reach. So Gabe Green will be giving up 5 inches of height, an inch or so of reach, but Gabe Green is definitely the bigger, more physically imposing guy in the division here. Very muscular, very strong frame. Like I said, Ian Garry coming off of the Cage Warrior scene in Europe, and he is, known as this, they like to market now that Conor McGregor's out of the scene. Undefeated Irishman, very flashy guy, decent personality, and he's, very powerful counter striker. One of these sniper type counter strikers where he's not going to stand in the pocket and really exchange with you, but he'll catch you coming in at the perfect moment and, either high kick your lights out or, hit you with a nice crisp counter strike, like a right cross, the way he did against Jordan Williams in his debut. So he got Jordan Williams last November as his debut. A perfect matchup for a guy who wants to get a highlight reel knockout in the UFC in his debut. Jordan Williams not known for having the best durability or the best defense, but a notable name anyways. I see a lot of holes in Ian Garry's game. He is the minus 155 favorite here. And of course, he is undefeated on a great streak. Gabe Green still has a great record, 11-3. I think he's faced much tougher competition. He is the plus 135 underdog. And I think these lines should almost be flipped. When you look at their individual skill sets, I think Gabe Green is just going to be the stronger guy in the clinch. He's got the ability to not only strike powerfully, he stands his ground in the pocket, trades shots, plants his feet, and has really good combinations. You saw that against Daniel Rodriguez, but more so over Philip Rowe, who has kind of a similar physique as Ian Garry, right? And he was able to catch Philip Rowe, knock him down several times, and win a decision there. Gabe Green also has a very underrated ground game. We haven't seen a whole lot of it in the UFC. We saw a little bit of the scrambles against Philip Rowe, but Philip Rowe is actually such a good ground fighter himself. He was able to negate some of those things and not get in harm's way against Gabe Green on the ground. Most recently, Gabe Green beat Johan Linnes, who was an LFA standout, a very powerful guy, and he got folded by Johan Linnes at one moment, but showed such great resolve. He came back to life very quickly from that and was able to end up knocking him out later in the same round. So I love that for Gabe Green. I think Gabe Green is a guy who's very, very tough, can overcome adversity, and seems to get better as the fight goes on. Ian Garry, I think, will be taken into deep waters for maybe one of the first times by probably the strongest guy he'll face, especially against the cage and the clinch. Excuse me. Ian Garry is a guy who has to dance on the outside, very good lateral movement, but he has trouble keeping his back off the cage. Not only was Jordan Williams able to touch him up, striking at range even, but Darian Weeks on 1 week notice was able to really give Ian Garry a fight. I mean, take him through a 3-round decision where he had to really work to win two of those 3 rounds. He did get taken down a couple times. Darian Weeks is just probably not going to be as strong against the fence as a guy like Gabe Green. I think Gabe Green will use his jiu-jitsu know-how to take this fight to the ground. His strength can rip Ian Garry off of the fence if he can corner him there. And I think he can really control Ian Garry from the top position, maybe even get a submission that we haven't seen from him inside the UFC. So I think the submission's definitely on the table. I think wearing him down and winning a decision's on the table. And I think even trading on the feet and, exposing that tall man defense of Ian Garry, where Ian Garry pulls his head back in straight lines at times. He certainly fights like an undefeated, confident fighter, the way that he uses his speed and reflexes to really dodge strikes. But I think Gabe Green can really play the bully here, be the shadow of Ian Garry, and, get some of the bigger moments on the feet striking-wise. But most importantly, just push him against the cage, cut off the cage and corner him and get him to the ground and slow him down. So I think a guy like Gabe Green that accelerates into a fight will really expose some of the inexperienced holes in the game of Ian Garry. These guys are both young and improving. I'm not fading the cardio of Ian Garry. He did have a 5-round fight against Jack Grant, in Cage Warriors before the UFC. Looked decent, grappling and defending takedowns. But, Jack Grant was really not, he didn't have the tools to take this fight to the ground the way that I think Gabe Green does. So, like I said, I think Gabe Green could win this in a number of ways. He has been knocked out a couple of times. One of those was by Jalen Turner, a very strong guy. But I think what we just saw against Johan Linnes shows very good durability, very good ability to recover from getting hit. And I'm going to take Gabe Green as an underdog here to win over Ian Garry. I think he could be by sub. I'm going to call it by sub in rounds 2 or 3. But I think the best bet here would be just Gabe Green just taking the underdog money line. But if I see that submission prop for Gabe Green, I'll certainly, if that's juicy enough, I'll take a stab at that. Up next at welterweight, another one of these aged veterans, Robbie Lawler, taking on Bryan Barbarena. Robbie Lawler, 40 years old, 5'11", 74-inch reach, taking on Bryan Barberena, who is 33 years old, 6 foot tall, 72-inch reach. So a little bit bigger in frame and stature is Bryan Barberena. A little bit shorter reach on paper, but 7 years younger, still some gas left in the tank. And a guy who's had a pretty up and down career is Bryan Barberena. I mean, he's, beats a certain level of opponent, doesn't beat others, decent durability, decent striking output, usually a lot to like about this guy. Robbie Lawler, former champion. He was in the UFC, as a young man a long time ago. And I remember him even going over to that promotion, Elite XC, if you remember that one. That was around for a few years. He was the champion there after knocking out Shogun, who was older brother, and, eventually becoming the champion there, going over to Strikeforce to challenge for the belt, and then eventually becoming the UFC champion. So he's had a long career, usually relying on his power, his, counter-striking style, forward pressure, aggression, and just that knockout power. He's a guy who could get outstruck on the numbers in, big title fights, but still win rounds based on the damage he inflicts on his opponents and the knockdowns and things like that. So a guy who's never really had great striking output, even over 5-round fights, which he's had plenty of. So, cardio, not really questioned. Toughness, not questioned at all. Robbie Lawler is super durable. Only been knocked out by Nick Diaz years ago and by, Tyron Woodley when he lost his belt in round 1. So those are the only 2 times he's actually been knocked out. Submitted a few times over the course of his career, but he's had a long one. So very durable guy, can usually last until the judges' scorecards. And recently before the Nick Diaz fight in September, which was kind of like a circus fight, honestly, at 185, he was on a 4-fight losing streak and not looking the best. I mean, he's fighting a high caliber opponent every single time he goes out these days. But, both Bryan and Robbie Lawler really succumb and lose fights to the same thing, which is, getting out grappled, getting out wrestled against the cage, and getting out controlled by their opponents, Obviously, I think Robbie Lawler has had to deal with that at a higher level of opponent. But nonetheless, Bryan Barberena, he's had all these up-and-coming guys like Colby Covington, really give him a hard time. Leon Edwards on his rise up. Even Vicente Luque and Randy Brown were the guys who didn't need to take him down. They were just able to knock him out on the feet. But, that's usually where these guys struggle. Every single fight that Bryan Barberena loses is him getting out-grappled, if not those 2 counter-strikers that I, mentioned. So, that'll probably be off the table. I think both of these guys will have, Robbie Lawler lately in the past, decade has not really been the type of guy to go for a heavy takedown, game plan. So I think both guys will have a breath of fresh air here, not have to worry about getting out-controlled by the other. Although if one guy does employ the grappling, I think Robbie Lawler would be the smart one to do so. Bryan Barberena has the far worse takedown defense, in my opinion. But I just don't think that's going to happen. That's a clear path if he wants to mix it in at the end of rounds to secure a round, but I just don't see that happening. So I think both guys will enjoy striking on the feet at range. There's a lot of chances for Robbie Lawler to crack Bryan Barberena. The guy does not have great, movement as far as defense goes. Striking defense is pretty poor, and he leaves a lot of openings with the, just the wide array of strikes he throws. A lot of, naked leg kicks, a lot of, looping hooks, both lead hooks and, his rear left hook. They're all very wide and looping MMA type of hooks, and they leave a lot of openings where Robbie Lawler could blitz in and land something big, but that power just doesn't seem to be there. I mean, you watched him against Nick Diaz in September, a guy who, he's had legendary toughness too as Diaz, but Robbie Lawler really should have made easier work of a guy who's been out for 5 years, looked in horrible shape, couldn't even make weight to 170 a week of, so... the fact that it took him until round 3 to basically have Diaz quit kind of does worry me. I mean, he didn't really gain much respect from Diaz against the cage when we had him cornered. And again, a guy who relies on his power is fading these days at 40 years old. He's got decent head movement in boxing still, does Robbie Lawler, but still very hittable, especially the further the fight goes on. I'd say if one guy got the finish here, it would be Robbie Lawler, potentially early on, but the later this goes, I think the numbers are going to build up on the board for Bryan Barberena. The guy always racks up a huge amount of significant striking output. Like I mentioned, a wide variety of strikes between leg kicks, 1-2s to the body, big looping hooks up top that can usually land. He's got a nice lead hook, lead right hook, good elbows up close if Robbie Lawler pushes the distance. I just think he's going to have the much more active schedule, and that's really going to do him well. He's in good shape, doesn't always win, doesn't have the best UFC record, but I think in a fight like this, where the wrestling will be largely off the table, I think I like Bryan Barbarena at underdog prices here. He's plus 105. Robbie Lawler, for some reason, the minus 125 favorite at 40 years old. I just think it's harder to trust the retained skills of Robbie Lawler here. Maybe if there's a juicy decision prop for Bryan Barbarena, I'll take it, but he's usually in close fights. I just think he does come out the victor in this one. Okay, up next, there's two exciting lightweights, two young guys, Brad Riddell, Jalen Turner. Very close money line as well. Jalen Turner, the bigger man here, 6'3", 77-inch reach, and only 27 years old, the younger guy by a few years. He is now the minus 125 favorite, and I think that money is coming in on Jalen Turner. Brad Riddell, the more natural lightweight, he's 5'8", 30 years old, 71-inch reach for the New Zealander from City Kickboxing. He is the plus 105 underdog. Currently, both guys have good records, 12-5 for Jalen Turner. Against some better opponents, in my opinion, too, and 10-2 the record for Brad Riddell, coming off of his loss in December to Rafael Fiziev, where he suffered his first knockout loss by a massive spinning heel kick, a fight where he was pretty much pushed his back against the cage, basically out-aggressed, outstruck by Rafael Fiziev. No shame there, but, not a good performance from him. He looks very timid in that fight. Jalen Turner never has that problem. Very, very aggressive striker. Always opens up, pushing his opponents back, advancing the whole time with a switch stance. And he's got such a huge physique at 6'3" and a 77-inch reach. At 155, that's unheard of, and he's able to really, use a nice long jab. He's got a laser of a left straight when he's in that stance. And, amazing knees up the middle when he's up close. Of course, not hard to do when you're, got the long limbs of Jalen Turner at 6'3". That would, be a pretty easy weapon to use against the shorter man in Brad Riddell. But yeah, that laser left straight and some of those 3-2 counters he does up close. Very devastating. Those are the ones that took out Jamie Malarkey. Those are the ones that really knocked down and gave trouble to Brock Weaver, Josh Kulabau. Just a lot of guys succumbing to the strikes that are actually decent talents. And Jalen Turner, can really put the icing on the cake with a nice submission game, too. He'll get the guy hurt and not really have to waste time getting into their guard, going for ground and pound to finish the fight. If it's not going to end, he can really just get a nice back take and, lock up the choke, which he's done a few times now. So, 7 UFC fights for Jalen Turner, 5-2 record. So far, this will be the 6th appearance for Brad Riddell, where he is currently 4-1, of course, coming off of a loss. So Jalen Turner, tough guy too. He's only lost by knockout to Nico Price, a guy who's notorious for knocking out guys that are pretty durable. I mentioned earlier the durability and resolve of Gabe Green. He knocked out Gabe Green back in Bellator very early in round 1. Who else? Yeah, Jamie Malarkey is a guy who had pretty good durability, knocked him out. Josh Kulabau, a pretty serviceable guy as well. So very impressive record of finishes, all finishes for the 12 wins of Jalen Turner, 9 knockouts, 3 submissions. He's currently 0-2 in decisions. The decision that's the most recent, the most relevant, is against Matt Frevola, where Matt Frevola basically was able to, he didn't outland Jalen Turner, but he outcontrolled him, getting some takedowns and holding him down. That's really what Brad Riddell will have to mix in here, I think. If not catch Jalen Turner coming in with something too aggressive and too sloppy, which could happen, I think Brad Riddell will have to mix in some cage pushing, some clinch control time, maybe get the takedown to mix things up. Brad Riddell has done that. He's got decent takedown offense, good at catching kicks and taking his opponents down. He's just not good at holding them down, which, to be expected against a guy who's primarily a kickboxer in his foundation. But, good leg kicks, a good clean jab. Like I mentioned, that quick blitzing overhand right. He's got good counters when his opponents, advance forward, give him the opportunity to find a hole in their game, which can happen for Jalen Turner for sure. I mean, Jalen Turner's aggressive as hell, but he can get caught very confidently exchanging in the pocket. And with those long strikes of his, sometimes he does leave openings that I can see, especially like the shorter man against the taller Jalen Turner. That crazy overhand right that Brad Riddell has. It's so fast. It comes out of nowhere. I could see that being a potential weapon against Jalen Turner if he's not careful. Jalen Turner, I think, since we're talking about the wrestling game and mixing things up, he does have the better takedown offense. Doesn't always use it, but I could see him, being the guy that could actually do that the later the fight goes. He could hurt Brad on the feet, change levels against the cage. He's very good at, dragging guys down with the body lock off of the cage. I just see more ways to win for Jalen Turner. I like the fact that he is such a potent finisher. Not having a decision win, does sketch me out a little bit here, but I don't see his cardio ever being an issue for him. As much volume as he throws in his fight so far. And just with the size, the power, the grappling ability, I just see him winning this fight. And for the odds, I don't think it's that bad of a price. I'd pay the money line at minus 125. I'd look for the inside the distance prop. And I'd probably look for fight doesn't go to decision as well if it's a good enough price. That'll cover both sides. So give me Jalen Turner to win. I'm going to call a round 2 knockout. Up next at bantamweight, a pretty high-profile fight between Sean O'Malley and Pedro Munhoz. Pedro Munhoz, I believe, is number 10 in the bantamweight rankings. Sean O'Malley worked his way up to number 13 at this point. It's odd because this is a high-profile fight, but I don't have a whole lot to say as far as the breakdown for this one. I'll try anyways. Sean O'Malley, 15-1. Only loss was to Marlon Chito Vera. Those leg kicks that, deadened the nerve of Sean O'Malley back, I think that was summer of 2020. And then he got ground and pounded out. Pedro Munhoz, 5'6", 65-inch reach, 35 years old, compared to Sean O'Malley, who is only 27 still, 72-inch reach and 5'11". So about as big of a bantamweight as you can get, as long as of a reach as you can get. 7-inch reach advantage. A 5.5-inch height advantage. The younger guy by a solid, what are we looking at, 8 years. So there's a lot to like. Tail of the tape advantage all over the place goes for Sean O'Malley. Momentum goes for Sean O'Malley. All that we're giving Pedro Munhoz here is he's got good leg kicks. He's got more experience than anybody else at bantamweight. He's got the most bouts in bantamweight history. I believe at 17. He's been in the UFC for, I think, like 8.5 years. So I think only Uriah Faber might have as many bouts as he does at the weight class. And he's durable. He's never been knocked out, never been submitted in all of those bouts against, champion after title challenger. So it's always sketchy when you have a minus 280 and climbing favorite in Sean O'Malley versus a plus 230 underdog in Pedro Munhoz when the guy has got so much wealth of experience. But 35 years old is, about to be the limit for bantamweight. We know that the decline is right there. And then you mix in the fact that, he's lost like 4 of his last 5 fights. He's, so much shorter, so much less reach. And then he doesn't really have like anything else to fall back on as far as, he is a BJJ black belt, but he really keeps that in the back pocket. We haven't seen a submission win from him in a long time, and he's not threatening takedowns. So I don't know how you're going to go against the larger, younger Sean O'Malley's faster, better movement, better array of kicks, and a shocking 8.26 significant strikes landed per minute for Sean O'Malley. And that's not even over a small sample size anymore. That's over 9 fights. So that's incredible. Pedro Munhoz is an incredible stat as well. 5.5 significant strikes landed per minute, which is over all of those 17 bouts on average. That's pretty incredible in itself, but at the same time, he's still outlanded by his opponents on average as well. They average around like over 6 significant strikes landed that he gets absorbed per minute over all of those fights. So, he's got knockout power, does Pedro Munhoz, if he can get into range, but this is going to be very tough. This is the biggest guy he's fought probably ever, maybe in a long time. I can't think of anybody else on his record that's matched these stats before. It would have to have been a long time ago, maybe Rob Font even back, that would be the closest you would get to like a long, lanky opponent that way that's got good reach and could really make himself long. And he submitted Rob Font, but that was back in 2017. So over the past 5 fights for Pedro Munhoz, he's been a decision in every single one of those 5 fights, losing 4 of them. So he beat Jimmy Rivera by decision over a 3-round fight. The other 4 fights were all against either current or former champions, and he lost all of those by unanimous decision. The Frankie Edgar one was a very close split decision, but still, over 5 rounds. So he's got 5-round cardio. and the durability is going to make me believe that this will go over 2.5, and probably fight goes to decision here. But Sean O'Malley is such a powerful, counter striker, sets things up very well. And with the age of Pedro Munhoz getting up there, I really can't even trust that anymore. The fight goes to decision is sitting around plus 125 currently. And I'd love to take a stab on that because I believe in the durability of Pedro Munhoz. But at the same time, you total up all of these things against him. Just with the amount of strikes that Sean O'Malley will throw and land in this fight, something might crack Pedro Munhoz at last here, right? There's going to be such an opportunity. I would have to see Pedro Munhoz probably getting this done inside the distance if he wins by some sort of knockout. Maybe deadening up the legs of Sean O'Malley if he's not checking those leg kicks. Slowing the movement and maybe eventually getting in range when Sean O'Malley gets too cocky or something. It would have to be a mistake on the part of Sean O'Malley. Otherwise, I don't see him winning a decision here at all. He's got a negative record currently in decisions. I believe like 6-7 overall for Pedro Munhoz. And just with the large amount of striking volume from Sean O'Malley, I see him winning this fight by decision, most likely. But the plus 125 on fight goes to decision. I just don't even think that's enough for me to... it's so one-sided. My view on this going to decision would largely be because of Pedro Munhoz's durability, not because of any lack in power of Sean O'Malley or lack of ability there. I would find it really ironic and pretty humorous if Sean O'Malley's the first man to knock out Pedro Munhoz when he couldn't knock out Chris Moutinho. I thought that would be a pretty funny outcome. But either way, I'm going to call Sean O'Malley to win this by decision. Minus 280, going to quickly probably surpass minus 300 by fight night. That's a little bit too rich for my blood, considering all of the experience of Pedro Munhoz. So maybe I'd look for the Sean O'Malley by decision prop if that was, closer to even money. But Sean O'Malley decision is the pick. Okay, these fights are getting good at the end of the night. Alex Pereira taking on Sean Strickland at 185. This is a pivotal bout, probably determines who's moving up to face the champion next. Alex Pereira, they're trying to build up this narrative. He is the last guy to knock out, the only guy to knock out Israel Adesanya. Back in their professional kickboxing days, he knocked him out, did Alex Pereira. He is the minus 120 favorite here, surprisingly over Sean Strickland, the plus 100 underdog. Sean Strickland, number 4 in the middleweight rankings, currently riding a 6-fight win streak in the division. He has had 28 professional fights, 15 in the UFC, versus Alex Pereira, only 5-1 as a professional so far, and only 2 fights in the UFC. So pretty shocking that Alex Pereira is the favorite here. He is going to be the slightly older man, but he's going to be much bigger as well. 34 years old for Pereira, 6'4", 79-inch reach, so a very large frame for middleweight versus Sean Strickland, 31 years old, the younger man, 6'1", 76-inch reach. Sean Strickland, a former welterweight, whereas Alex Pereira is a former 205-pounder, both in his kickboxing career and in his early MMA career, where he started in Jungle Fight. He was 5-1. He dropped his first fight in Jungle Fight years ago, like 7 years ago on the regional scene there in Brazil by a submission. Then he's come on a 5-fight win streak. One devastating KO in the LFA, 2 fights in the UFC. He lost the round to Andreas Michailidis, getting controlled in the grappling, but then he came back on a nice flying knee in round 2 for a beautiful debut. And now he has a win, which I like to see, over Bruno Silva, a fellow powerful striker, and a guy that he actually took to a 3-round decision, which I like to see, that he was able to persevere through 3 rounds, have good MMA cardio, able to defend takedowns against the cage. He was taken down twice by Bruno Silva, who's never taken down anybody before, so even Bruno Silva was mixing it up against Alex Pereira. That would be smart for Sean Strickland to do here. But overall, I was just happy to see him get a decision victory and not just another quick finish. We know his cardio at least holds up. More so than Bruno Silva's did, which is why he got the win. So, for Alex Pereira to win, he can win by striking at range. If Sean Strickland does not mix things up and wants to stand and bang with Alex Pereira, I don't think it'll go well for him. I think then that's when Alex Pereira will look like the minus 120 favorite here, and that would be fair. I think Alex Pereira needs to really maintain the distance, push Sean Strickland back towards the cage, and that's where Alex Pereira does some of his best work in MMA. The vicious hooks against the cage when his opponents are kind of trapped, almost like you can picture him back in his professional kickboxing days, backing guys up against the ropes and knocking them out, when they can't really move and they're trapped. Pereira's got nice knees, of course, very powerful kicks, but the hands are vicious as well. Both left and right hooks are very vicious. And I could see him ending this. Sean Strickland has only been knocked out one time, and that was by Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Back in 2018, he got knocked out by a vicious kick and punching sequence there. He was also knocked down by Kamaru Usman before losing the decision to him. Sean Strickland is 25-3 professionally, a stellar record, and only has lost 3 fights in the UFC. That was to Ponzinibbio, Dos Santos, and to Kamaru Usman. So not bad losses there. Very durable guy, very defensively sound, very basic, but very good fundamental kickboxing skills himself. He has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt as well. You don't get a chance to see that a lot, although in his last fight against Uriah Hall, he was, actually that was 2 fights ago. Uriah Hall, a 5-round unanimous decision victory, where he was actually mixing in takedowns against Uriah Hall in rounds 2, 3, and I believe 4 or 5 as well. So, you'd love to see that if he could get those same trips, those same body locks he did against Uriah Hall and just smother Alex Pereira. You do see some good fundamental skills budding from Alex Pereira. You can tell he's working on digging underhooks against the cage, threatening like a guillotine when he gets taken down, trying to work back up to his feet, wall walk on the cage. Things like that are good for Pereira, but they're not anywhere near the developed skills of Sean Strickland. So if Sean Strickland can just put his ego aside, make this a boring, grinding, complete MMA fight, and win a decision over Alex Pereira, or maybe even inside the distance if you can wear him down, that would be great. But I think he just needs to make this an MMA fight, not a kickboxing one. Not a hot take there, very obvious, but will Sean Strickland do it? I'm not sure we can trust him to, but hopefully, since he's number 4 in the rankings and this fight is very pivotal to see who fights the champion next, maybe he will fight a smart fight, the fight of least resistance, and I'm going to take Sean Strickland to win. I really do value his experience here. I'm not overly confident, and I probably will not be betting this fight, but I do think it is bet the underdog or pass. So give me Sean Strickland to win. I'll say by decision. Okay, here we are, the first of the 2 title fights of the pay-per-view, this one at 145 pounds. Alexander Volkanovski defending his strap against Max Holloway. Once again, for the 3rd time now, they fought in 2019 and 2020. Max Holloway losing both of those bouts by decision. Very close fights. I mean, the first fight, Volkanovski outstruck Holloway, in total and significant strikes, and beat him 3 rounds to 2, I thought pretty clearly. In the second fight, it was once again Volkanovski stealing 3 out of 5 rounds, outlanding him on strikes, actually mixing in takedowns, had a little bit of control time as well when he was able to, but he went 3 for 9 on takedowns over the course of the fight, I want to say. So that was a much closer fight. It was a split decision win for Alexander Volkanovski. So we've seen 10 rounds of these 2 elite featherweights, 2 of the best featherweights of all time, go at it. So the bookies think they have it figured out. Minus 190, the favorite price right now for Volkanovski. That is climbing. Max Holloway, the plus 155 underdog, which is just crazy to think that Max Holloway, at 25 UFC fights, 5'11", 69-inch reach, and only 30 years old, is the underdog here against Volkanovski, the much shorter man, 5'6", 71-inch reach, though, a slight reach advantage, 33 years old, and only 11 UFC fights compared to Max Holloway. Volkanovski's riding a huge streak. Not only has he beaten Max Holloway twice now, but he's on a huge win streak. He hasn't lost in 9 years and only lost 1 time back in the day. He's 24-1 is his record. He's fought, started at welterweight, went down to lightweight, and now, been at featherweight for a while. I think number 2 pound for pound in the world as well. Max Holloway, a great record as well, 23-6, definitely evolved as a fighter, kind of in the middle of his UFC run, becoming, an amazing, godlike boxer in MMA, using his range well, breaks his opponents with punches and bunches, not the heaviest hitter, but he is a guy who will slowly, over the course of a fight, break down his opponent and, just make them unable to continue. Almost like Calvin Kattar breaking his soul and his spirit in that fight, but like the fight before that, when he fought T-City, Brian Ortega, and he had to basically get a doctor's stoppage between rounds 4 and 5. I mean, that's the type of thing that I mean when I say he breaks down his opponents. Unfortunately, that probably does not happen. He uses his pace, weaponized cardio, is also going to be matched by Alexander Volkanovski. What impresses me about Volkanovski in this fight, this is almost like a high-level Pedro Munhoz, Sean O'Malley fight, where both guys are durable. One guy very tall for the division, one guy much shorter in stature. But Volkanovski is so good at getting in range, using lateral movement. He can blitz in, get back out to safety. He's not afraid to be, he's light on his feet on the outside, but not afraid to actually plant his feet and exchange in the pocket as well. Get on the inside of the taller man, Max Holloway. That's how he's gotten the numbers advantage as far as significant strikes in their fights so far. I give the power advantage to Volkanovski, and of course just the volume and probably the fundamental form advantage to Max Holloway. He's got very good long. He's good at making himself long as Max Holloway. Not only just his physique, but really just clean, crisp boxing where his shoulders right up against the chin. Very defensively sound as Max Holloway too. He's good at cutting off the cage and stalking down his opponents. It's a very close fight. I'm a fan of both guys. I'm biased to both guys. I can't imagine how one would be the underdog to the other. Even though we've seen this fight play out a couple times, it's still hard to imagine a world where this is not going to be close again. And the fact that it's minus 190 for Volkanovski is a big price to pay. I'd be fine with paying minus 190 for Volkanovski for any other opponent besides Max Holloway, where I know it's been close in both of their fights before. So I love the adversity that Alexander Volkanovski, has overcome, especially in that Brian Ortega fight in September. He ended up going back earlier this year and was supposed to fight Max Holloway, but ended up getting the Korean Zombie on somewhat short notice. Absolutely murdered the Korean Zombie and stopped him in the fight. Max Holloway has been dealing with some injuries, around like the New Year's, and then most recently again in the spring. So that is a little bit of a concern in a close fight. I think that was an undisclosed injury. I'm not sure we ever figured out what that was, but he's cleared to continue training, re-injured something again, cleared to continue training again. I just love the well-rounded MMA game of Volkanovski, the power advantage. We know that the cardio is not going to be questioned for either guy, and both guys are durable as all hell. So, the betting line makes sense in theory. I won't be getting there myself, I don't think. Maybe I would look for Volkanovski by decision if that was, plus money, but... I'm going to pick Alexander Volkanovski here. I think he's more well-rounded. I think he's, the more powerful guy. And I've seen him, display a little bit more heart. Obviously Max Holloway displays heart in his fights, stopping Jose Aldo twice, having 2 wars with Volkanovski. The war he just had with Yair Rodriguez. He definitely has heart. I'm not saying Max Holloway doesn't have heart, but you're talking about Volkanovski was so close to being finished in his bout against Brian Ortega, and to come back from that and to continue grinding and win that war of a fight, I just thought that displayed a lot more heart than I've seen Max Holloway have to display when he usually breaks down his opponents. So give me Volkanovski. I do think that this probably is the spot to bet Max Holloway at dog odds. If you're just the type of bettor that wants to manipulate a mispriced line, I think that Max Holloway is the side, and maybe you could get that even juicier to win by decision, but I can't get there myself. I can't bet against either of these guys. I'm going to take, for prediction's sake, Alexander Volkanovski to once again have a victory over Max Holloway. So give me Volkanovski by decision. Okay, we've made it all the way to the main event, the final title fight of the night. Israel Adesanya defending his middleweight championship once again. 185-pound bout against Jared Cannonier. Huge favorite for Israel Adesanya, minus 400 currently over the plus 300 underdog Jared Cannonier. It makes sense to me. I don't like it, but it does make sense. Israel Adesanya, the bigger frame here, 6'4", 80-inch reach, 32 years old, almost 33 later this month. Jared Cannonier is somewhere between 5'11 and 6 foot tall, 38 years old, much older man, 77.5-inch reach, 15-5 record. Currently at middleweight, because he's fought at heavyweight briefly and light heavyweight briefly, has Jared Cannonier. He has now had 6 fights at middleweight, and he has gone 5-1 in those bouts, only losing to Robert Whittaker. He has 4 finishes, including the leg kick TKO over the aged Anderson Silva. So he's 3-3 in decisions overall. Only been in one 5-round fight, and that was against Kelvin Gastelum, which he won. It's just the fact that he's so one-sided in this fight. He's a power puncher. You can't deny that. Very, very strong, ground and pound, as we just saw in his last fight as well, over Derek Brunson, who he beat. But no grappling threat. And you really need a grappling threat to challenge Israel Adesanya. You've got to have some of his physical attributes. Jared Cannonier has some of those with the long reach, and he's tall, but no sort of grappling threat whatsoever is a problem here. And even if you had a little bit, the takedown defense of Israel Adesanya has been battle-tested. 77% takedown defense over his UFC career of like 12 fights or so. It's pretty incredible against the amount of powerful wrestlers he's faced. Yoel Romero, Derek Brunson, Marvin Vettori, and even Robert Whittaker, who he had a very close fight with most recently. So let's go to that, So the only loss that Izzy's ever had was against Jan Blachowicz, at 205. You can forgive that. But his run recently has been very lackluster, in my opinion. He had that horrible fight against Yoel Romero, low-volume fight. Both guys to blame for that one. He had the impressive knockout over Paulo Costa in round 2. Paulo Costa was in rare form for that fight, to say the least. Jan Blachowicz, I mentioned. Then, a clear decision win over Vettori, who was trying to grapple him the whole time against the cage. And then most recently, the Robert Whittaker fight was a fight where he easily could have lost that fight. It was a very close fight. This fight, I was hoping, we would get a fun matchup between somebody he could, go out there and display his creative kickboxing, his creative, style bender ways against once again. But Jared Cannonier will probably make him very timid, almost like the Yoel Romero fight. He'll probably try to play the smart. I don't blame him for it, and stay safe outside of the range of Jared Cannonier's power strikes. The definition of a puncher's chance is Jared Cannonier in this fight. I expect to see Israel Adesanya dancing at range, on the outside of the cage. Spamming leg kicks as usual, pumping the jab in the face of Jared Cannonier, switching stances. Every time Jared Cannonier might try to advance, Izzy's going to pump that, straight right or straight left into his face, and just show him, what happens if he advances on him, get him off balance with more leg kicks, and, just stay at range that way. And I think he does that over the course of 5 rounds. I'm probably going to predict Izzy by decision here, which is sitting at like plus 120, plus 130, maybe even, if you can get it that high. That's a good way to transform the money line of minus 400, but I think that over 25 minutes, over such a one-dimensional fighter in Jared Cannonier, that's a dangerous proposition because, Izzy does have power at the end of the day. You never know when he's going to hit you with something crazy. And over 25 minutes of a stand-up affair here, I don't even know if I can probably get there with the decision props. So it's probably going to be a pass betting-wise. I love having money in the main events. I'm trying to stay off of the parlays as long as I can this week to try to get back on track. So I probably will just be passing on this fight. Not enough meat in the bone for an underdog price, even for Jared Cannonier. You could probably look for him by knockout, which would, probably not be much more than his money line. Not enough for me to throw anything on. The safe bet would be like, scorecards or no action for Jared Cannonier, his knockout. But even then, like I mentioned, I think it's likely that Israel Adesanya wins this fight by decision, but there is that chance that this does not go to the scorecards either. So, and I can see probably Israel Adesanya getting that done just as easily as Jared Cannonier, in all honesty. So, Jared Cannonier, that Whittaker fight he had was actually the real eye-opener, getting outstruck by the much smaller, better boxer in Robert Whittaker, who actually had him hurt in round 3 and in all sorts of trouble and then controlled in round 3. That was really the eye-opener there. The Kelvin Gastelum fight, impressive enough that it's a 5-round fight he won, but I'm just not seeing enough from Jared Cannonier. Give me Israel Adesanya once again to extend his win streak and win this fight by decision. Okay, guys, there you have it. All 12 fights broken down for UFC 276. The big pay-per-view, Adesanya defending against Cannonier, Volkanovski against Holloway. So many fun fights. As a fan, I'm really excited for this one. And as a bettor, I might be even more excited. There's a lot of good spots. Some good priced money lines. The props will be coming out later, so I will have the best bets and props video out in the next couple days. And I think there's going to be quite a bit of good spots for us here to make some money. So check out that video. Leave a like. Leave a subscribe. Really appreciate all the support so far. Leave a comment with some of your better predictions this week. If you agree or disagree with me, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Also on Twitter, @CombatAddict1. Leave me a follow there and let's talk some fights. So, all right, you guys, I'll catch you next time. Cheers.